Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're getting an opportunity to make a video I've been wanting to create for a very long time, but we had to wait for Tears of the Kingdom to come and go. And it has. So now, Lunatoons can finally rank all of the Zelda games, all of the mainline Zelda games. So the multiplayer ones I'm leaving out of this, some of the spin-offs I'm leaving out of this. It's just strictly mainline. Some other things I want to preface before we get to the list is that this is purely subjective. These are based off of my experiences, where my head was at when I first played the game. Nostalgia is in full effect here, so my list is going to look very different from your list. Your list would look different from somebody else's. The other thing is that some of these games I've not played for years. You know, I've played through all of these games over the course of 15 to 20 years. So it's been a while for some of these. I'm going to try to do all of them justice as best I can. But if I'm a little forgetful or if I leave some mechanics or like story stuff out, you know, just please do forgive me. There's also a bunch of these games, so I can't spend an insane amount of time on every single one. So we're going to go kind of fast paced to get through this list, but whatever. I hope you enjoy. Let's get to it. Number 15, Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. Now, I don't think this one comes as any surprise. If you've ever played Zelda 2 before, it's likely at the bottom of your list as well. Not to say it doesn't have its defenders. I'm sure they're out there, some die-hard Zelda 2 fans. Shout out to you guys, mad respect. I put probably an hour and a half into this game and said, I'm good. I've never had any kind of desire to go back to Zelda 2. They ditched the top-down kind of open world formula. There's still elements of it in there, but for the most part, they kind of moved to a side-scrolling action adventure. I will say they introduced towns and like friendly NPCs in this game, which I think does go a long way. I think that is a cool addition, but all in all, I just did not like the game whatsoever. It did not grab me. I was very confused about what I was doing, where I was going. A little too abstract for me. However, one major nugget I will give Zelda 2 is that if there was any Zelda game to be remade in the modern era, this would be the game to do it with. I would be so intrigued, so interested to see what a Zelda 2 remake might look like. Nintendo, let's make it happen. Number 14, The Legend of Zelda for the NES. Now, the first Legend of Zelda, I do not hate by any means. It's a game that, as a massive Zelda fan, I did feel the need to complete, and I would recommend it to other hardcore fans. That said, man, this game is brutally difficult, not just with its gameplay, but its navigation as well. The most obscure and poorly laid out secrets and passages to uncover, some of which I would have never found without the help of a guide. I'm also not ashamed to admit that I abused the hell out of the save states that were in the virtual console version of this game, which is the one that I played, and I would never blame anyone else for doing the same thing. But you do have to look back at what they achieved with the limited hardware and general lack of blueprints for a game like this, and you gotta respect the heck out of it. But again, upon completing The Legend of Zelda on the NES, I did feel a bit more complete inside as a Zelda fan. You know, I felt accomplished, that I got to experience a part of history. Whether you use guides or save states, whatever. If you're a hardcore fan, I do recommend going through it at least once. Number 13, Oracle of Seasons and Ages. Alright, I think this is probably the first hot ranking on this list. I'm sure a lot of people are going to have Oracle of Seasons and Ages much higher, and I don't necessarily hate the game. We're going to talk about some positives, but when making this list, I often had to ask myself, how badly would I like to go back and replay this game? And when I asked myself that question about Oracle of Seasons and Ages, this is just kind of where they ended up. So let's talk about it. Now, like I said, there are a lot of aspects that I did enjoy. First off, the presentation is quite nice. The sprites and sound design were extremely well done with what they had to work with on the Game Boy Color, and the games feature some well-designed dungeons, unique key items, and an interesting overworld mechanic like changing the seasons and the eras of time. But where my complaints come in are with the map design, enemies, and item swapping. So the map is very maze-like. While the game is what I would consider to be open world, you'll find that it's comprised of many tight corridor-like paths. And what bothers me about this is that it requires you to engage with just about every enemy and obstacle they place within that path. Why is this a problem? Well, it drastically slows down your traversal of the map, and after a while becomes extremely tedious, at least in my opinion. I have no problem with partaking in combat here and there, but I think we all know that feeling where at some point in a game, you just kind of want to run past most encounters for the sake of time. This is simply not possible in a lot of cases due to the tight hallways the game has you push through, and some of the enemies you're forced to fight are extremely annoying, like these burrowing enemies that pop out of the ground with no warning, or those with a really long reach and are difficult to hit. And with that comes the obstacles you'll come across as well, such as a simple pitfall or a heavy boulder. In order to get past these, you'll need to equip specific items to one of 2 available item slots. Usually you'll have a sword and shield equipped for the most part, so this will require you to pause the game, swap items around, unpause, use the item, then pause again, revert back to your sword and shield before you can, begin to progress. Odds are you'll come across obstacles like this every couple of minutes, so you can imagine how much time you'll be spending in pause menus swapping items around. These things just begin to stack up to make overworld traversal really, really annoying, and if you get lost, don't know where you're going, that annoyance turns into frustration real fast. At least it did for me. Alright, are we ready for another extremely hot ranking? I'm kind of nervous about this one. Number 12, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I know, 2 hot takes back to back. Just revoke my Zelda card, just take it away. But look, I just can't deny my disinterest with this game. Tears of the Kingdom is one of the rare occasions where I actually dropped a Zelda game mid-playthrough with no intention of returning. But of course, the game has its bright spots and gave me some incredible experiences, which you can hear about in my review of the game that I put together a few weeks back right here on the channel. I will link it down in the description. So here I will touch on what I neglected to mention in that video as far as the negative aspects are concerned, and to do this, I'm just going to play a clip from a recent podcast I was on where we were talking about Tears of the Kingdom. And by the way, this is the EXP podcast on Nish Quick Pop's channel. Definitely go check it out, and I'll link it in the description as well. There's so much side content in Tears of the Kingdom, and I'll explain it this way. Let's say you go to a restaurant, right, and you order an appetizer. Have the appetizer. That was a really good side quest appetizer. That was really great. All right, but here's my main course. Here's my big main plot, dungeon crawl, boss fight. That's the entree, right? That's what you really came here for. Tears of the Kingdom to me felt like I was having a meal of 20 appetizers. It was just appetizer after appetizer after appetizer, and I was like, I want something big to happen, man. I want the big meal right now. I would spend hours in the game and walk away with 2 new heart containers and maybe a hat. Did I really accomplish all that much? The pacing in Tears of the Kingdom just killed me. It drug me down constantly. Mad respect for the game. I don't hate the game. I know it's good. It is sold well. I've seen the reactions online. People love the game, and I can fully take a step back and understand that I'm in the minority here.
It just wasn't for you.
It just wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me.
There is a noticeable difference between the Ocarina of Time formula and the Breath of the Wild formula. Where the Ocarina of Time formula with Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, all that, the story was the main thing. Whereas now the exploration and the optional stuff is the main thing. It's kind of like you're creating your own story. Which it's cool. I like it, but I'm still getting used to it.
Number 11, Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. Alright, full disclosure, I've never played Spirit Tracks. It's the one mainline Zelda game that I have yet to touch, but I have played Phantom Hourglass. I know they control very similarly, so I'm going to go ahead and just group them together here. So on to Phantom Hourglass. I actually quite enjoyed this game as an overall package. The use of the touchscreen for combat and puzzle solving was a very interesting idea, even if it's not what I would consider to be the best way to control a Zelda game. They also had some fun use of the microphone on the DS that you would speak into or blow air through to cause a reaction in the game, so I really give it a lot of props for its willingness to experiment. I also really enjoyed the new character addition of Linebeck, a lovable coward with a solid character arc that leaves him as one of the more charming characters in all of Zelda. Otherwise, I did find the sailing and boat controls and some aspects of the combat to be a little lackluster or clunky. The dungeons, while sporting some classic environmental variety and unique puzzles, didn't really leave a major impression on me. As of right now, I don't think I could recall a single dungeon from the game or what made it special. It did also include stealth segments where you navigate a maze full of powerful dark nuts, which was pretty fun the first time, but after repeating this over and over throughout the game, it does get a bit stale. Ultimately, Phantom Hourglass is a good but not great game that could be catastrophic if you just so happen to hate the touch controls that are implemented. So from this point on, every other game that's listed, I would consider myself to have a positive relationship with, which makes ranking them that much more difficult because they're all fantastic. Number 10. Majora's Mask. But here we go, Majora's Mask. Now, understand, the main reason it's this low on the list is due to the fact that it doesn't have any nostalgic connection with me like some of the others do. But what I respect the most about Majora's Mask is its unique game mechanics revolving around the 3-day cycle, the dark and dreary setting and atmosphere, iconic cast of characters like the Happy Mask Salesman or the Skull Kid, and the insane development cycle of this title coming out only 1 year after the release of Ocarina of Time. I also loved the idea of transforming into the different races of Hyrule, or in this case Termina, as means of puzzle solving, combat, traversal. I believe it's the only game in the series that lets you play as a Goron, a Zora, Deku Scrub, and so on. The side content and NPCs are also so rich with lore, depressing and beautiful tales, and varying perspectives as the apocalypse approaches. Majora's Mask is likely a favorite amongst many fans, and I can't blame anyone for feeling that way. But for me, I played it once, did every piece of side content I could find, enjoyed the heck out of the ride, and moved on. Number 9. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. So the version of this game that I'm reviewing here is actually the Nintendo Switch remake, and I've got a lot of nostalgia for this one. Actually, my wife played through most of the game, probably about 75%, while I sat next to her on the couch in the co-pilot seat. I would occasionally take the controller from her to maybe take down a tricky boss or a tough puzzle, something like that, but anytime I can get my wife to play a video game with me, it's a big deal. She's not like the biggest gamer in the world, so yeah, it's a very special memory. But let's talk about the biggest standout features of Link's Awakening. I mean, it's definitely the visuals and the music. The art direction is so playful and unique, the world feels like it's part of a toy diorama. This fits extremely well with the narrative as it's slowly revealed to the player that we are somehow inhabiting a dream of the great windfish. The core objective being to wake up the sleeping whale and thus destroy the island of Koholint and all of its inhabitants. This was actually really heavy and one of my favorite overall plot points in the entire Zelda franchise. The gameplay is pretty standard top-down Zelda fun, and with some side-scrolling elements here and there, overall a fun ride which I do enjoy diving back into from time to time. Number 8. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Alright, of all of my nostalgia-based picks, this is a pretty strong one for me. I've got a ton of nostalgia for Skyward Sword, having played it for the first time on the Wii, and being an avid motion control lover at that time, this game really couldn't fail for me. I've been a Skyward Sword defender from the very beginning, but playing through the Switch remake did open my eyes to just how much fluff was in this game. This is one of the longer titles in the series, and much of it comes from what I feel are some unnecessary fetch quests and side missions that didn't add anything to the overall package. That said, Skyward Sword is home to some of the best dungeons, characters, and overall narratives that the franchise has to offer. It has what is likely my favorite incarnation of Zelda, and surrounds her with an easy-to-root-for Link, a wise and heroic Impa, 2 main villains in Girahim and Demise, and of course, Groose. It's got Groose. But I'd like to talk about Girahim specifically for just a second because he's probably my favorite Zelda villain, even above the Lord of Darkness himself, King Ganondorf. Girahim is creepy, unpredictable, and thus terrifying. His different forms and transformation into the Blade of Darkness were so incredible, and back when Super Smash Bros. Was still doing their new character reveals, I was the #1 supporter of Girahim for Smash. But characters aside, Skyward Sword has some of the best dungeons in the series, from the Lanayru mining facility to the Ancient Cistern. The game also features those heart-racing Silent Realm sections that leave you weaponless while being stalked by these eerie ancient guardians. And even better, Skyward Sword is home to the one, the only, the imprisoned... Hold on, I need to take this. Yes, Chief. But nobody likes the imprisoned? He's a giant walking avocado with jelly bean toes. Oh, understood, sir. Understood. Yes, sir. Okay, nobody likes the imprisoned. But alright, let's end this on a positive note. Remember, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword actually released alongside the 25th anniversary of The Legend of Zelda. And with that comes the physical release. And inside comes the 25th anniversary orchestral soundtrack for The Legend of Zelda. I cannot tell you how often I was blasting this in my truck on the drive to school or just anywhere in general. This was my first true love for video game soundtracks, video game music, and for that, I'm eternally grateful. Number 7, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. So after Zelda 1, Zelda 2, third time's the charm, A Link to the Past officially comes out and cements the definitive Legend of Zelda gameplay style from 1991 to the end of time, never to be changed, altered, or tweaked in any way. For me, it was one of the first retro games I experienced on my Wii U's Virtual Console. It was at the height of my Zelda fandom, and I had dedicated myself to playing every entry in the series. I honestly had pretty low expectations going in, unsure if the game would have aged well in the modern day, and to my surprise, it was absolutely phenomenal. Unlike many other games of that time, it actually featured a coherent story, not just one you read about in the game's manual, but a narrative that takes center stage. A vibrant world filled with incredible scenery, lived-in towns, and fantastical secrets to uncover. The enemy AI had improved, no longer just wandering about with no sense of direction as they did in Zelda 1 and 2. The changing between light and dark worlds and exploring the small differences was also a very cool mechanic. At the time, I had very little experience with retro games of that era and recall being shocked that such a robust experience was even possible. Major shoutouts to A Link to the Past, as it gave me the confidence to try other retro games even outside of the Zelda franchise. Number 6, The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. A Link Between Worlds is a spiritual successor to A Link to the Past, and in my opinion, improves on almost every aspect of its predecessor. Almost. I do still think I prefer the story of A Link to the Past, but the visuals of this game are as good as they come on the 3DS, and the fluid movement and tight controls make for arguably the best top-down Zelda gameplay and combat. The new main feature of this game has Link warping in and out of flat surfaces, turning into a painting at will and utilizing the 3D rendered environments beautifully. And much like A Link to the Past, we have a dark and light world to explore, but also variants of our main cast of characters. We have Hilda, who is a dark version of Zelda, Ravio, a cowardly shadow of Link, and Yuga, who takes the place of Lorule's Ganondorf. Once again, interesting concepts, which are coupled with a really solid plot twist and one of the best final boss fights in the series. And oh my god, I spent so many hours hunting for every last one of those octopus babies. I got you, Mama Octopus. I got you. Number 5, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. What is there to say about this title that hasn't been said a million times in the past? It pioneered the 3D action-adventure genre, introduced groundbreaking mechanics like Z-targeting, and delivered what could be considered the most definitive Zelda story to date. I think for many fans, when we hear the name Zelda, Ocarina of Time is the first title to pop into our heads. For me, it's one of the most replayable Zelda games out there. Just so many iconic zones to explore, NPCs to talk to, top-tier soundtrack, and visuals that still make my jaw drop to this day, yes, even on the N64. But if the game had any drawback, I'd say it's more the fault of the Nintendo 64's hardware, because let's be real, any game controlling with this is bound to have some clunk. Number 4, The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Now I already know what you're thinking. How can Breath of the Wild be ranked this high when Tears of the Kingdom is scratching the bottom of the barrel? Well, really, it just has to do with the time of Breath of the Wild's release. This game had such a massive impact on the gaming landscape, redefining not just what a Zelda game could be, but what a video game in general could be. The open air, non-linearity, realistic and fleshed out interactions, the physics engine. The game was such a breath of fresh air and showed everyone that great innovations in gaming were not done yet. Whereas Tears of the Kingdom is just $70 DLC, am I right? Yeah, oh, no, don't. Put the chairs down, put the chairs down. Of course, I'm only kidding, but I played Breath of the Wild religiously, as many others did. I completed every shrine and even went for the 900 Koroks. I got to about 600 and tapped out on that one, but this proved to be one of those lock myself in my room and don't come out until the sunrise kind of games. Truly a masterpiece. But I've got one additional story to add on top of this that I think is pretty amusing, because you see, I'm one of the few who actually played Breath of the Wild on the Wii U. I had not gotten a Switch at the time, but that didn't stop me from playing on the go. What I did was grab a duffel bag, cut a small hole in one of the sides, and I would carry my Wii U console in said bag. And anytime I was near an outlet, be it during my lunch break at work or at the doctor's office, I would feed the console's power cord through that hole and boot it right up. Maybe you knew this, maybe you didn't, but as long as you were within range of the console, you could play many of the Wii U's library strictly on the gamepad, so that's just what I did. Portable gaming without a Switch. I probably went through a good 25% of Breath of the Wild this way. Number 3. The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. So for the longest time, the Wind Waker was number 1 in my ranking, and if you ask me next week, maybe it could bump up a spot, but for now, I think I'll let it rest at number 3. So what stands out so much about the Wind Waker? Well, it's really got everything you look for in a complete Zelda experience. Great music, characters, story, puzzles, deeper combat, dungeons, boss battles, and all that's capped off with a beautiful cel-shaded art style that was hilariously controversial upon its release. But most of all, the Wind Waker's world and exploration is so wholly unique. All of Hyrule was swept away by a great flood, leaving a vast majority of the map as an open ocean. Some might argue that the ocean doesn't provide much in the way of content, and I can sorta understand if you feel that way, but for me, I found it thrilling each time I stepped onto the King of Red Lions and sailed away from the safety of shore. Finding sunken treasure, raiding enemy vessels, battling giant squids, I loved every bit. I had never explored a video game world quite like this, and I've never found one that can top that spirit of adventure. Number 2. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. So Twilight Princess is another Zelda title that I first experienced on the Wii, back when motion controls were a bit more rudimentary. You just kinda waggled the Wiimote around until everything was dead. But what initially captured me was, of course, the art and sound direction. One of my favorite aspects of the Zelda series is how unafraid they are to try new things, be it with the game's mechanics or their visuals and atmosphere. And Twilight Princess is drenched in that dark, moody grit, the music and ambience supporting every bit of its more mature visual style. And speaking of dark and moody, we have whom I consider to be the second best companion in all of Zelda, Midna, the Twilight Princess. Midna's journey as a character is so effective, it's no wonder she's a fan favorite. She really starts off as an adversary to Link, helping him only for selfish reasons, not really caring about his own well-being. But by the end, she finds herself throwing her own life into harm's way in his defense. And it also turns out she's a complete baddie all along. Sorry, Aaliyah. I love this incarnation of Link as well, a humble farmer who's called into action. I'm not sure why, but this Link feels the most authentic or believable. His upbringing, physical build, and general way he's portrayed makes me feel like, yeah, he could ditch the pitchfork in exchange for the Master Sword, no problem. I'd also argue that Twilight Princess is home to the greatest dungeons in the franchise: Arbiter's Grounds, Snow Peak Ruins, City in the Sky, just take your pick. It's been a while since we got a truly gritty Zelda release. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom definitely have their moments, but I think I'm ready for a spiritual successor to Twilight in the modern era. And number 1, The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap. Now this may come as a surprise for some, if not many viewers watching this right now, but if you've been following me for an extended period of time, even back to my Twitch days, you know how much I love The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap. Truly the most underrated and underappreciated Zelda release, and if you ask me to briefly describe it, I'd tell you it's the quintessential Zelda game. It's just consistently perfect from beginning to end and encapsulates exactly what it means to be a Zelda game, which is kinda funny considering it was developed by Capcom. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you it has the best dungeons, best puzzles, or best combat over every other game in the series, because that would be a lie. And to give an analogy, let's say Skyward Sword is like Bowser from Mario Kart. He's large, he can knock other racers out of his path, but he's got a downside. He's slow and he's easy to maneuver around. Well, A Link to the Past is Toad, a small, fast racer that can get easily tossed around by a bruiser. Well, Minish Cap is Mario. Maybe not the best at any particular thing, but is consistently great at everything overall. But with the stage set, we can actually talk about the game now. We all know that every Zelda game has a gimmick, a unique mechanic that sets it apart from all the others. Well, Minish Cap has two, and they're both excellent. The first being the ability to shrink down to the size of the Minish. I absolutely love the change of perspective, whether you're walking past giant acorns, crossing puddles as if they were lakes, or scurrying through villagers' homes like a mouse. It forces you to view the world from different perspectives and ask the question, if I were small right now, what secrets might I find here, or how could this area be traversed differently? And to me, it never gets old. Secondly is the introduction of the Four Sword, a legendary blade that splits Link into four. With this comes a myriad of different puzzles and combat scenarios. Makes me sad that the Four Sword hasn't shown up more often in subsequent mainline Zelda games, multiplayer games aside. Minish Cap is also hilarious, probably the most I've laughed in any Zelda game, from the absurdity of the minecarts, rocket blasting through a dungeon, Link screaming in terror, to Ezlo cursing and scolding Link for anything he can think of. Speaking of which, yes, this is Ezlo, our companion character, and he's amazing. I mentioned that Midna was my number 2 companion in the Zelda series, and that's because Ezlo is the GOAT. I don't want to spoil too much about his character if you haven't played the game already, but he's essentially a crotchety old man that got turned into a hat. And to have that kind of character tag along with such a laid-back and frankly airheaded Link is a phenomenal pairing. You can just look at this official cover art and see what I'm talking about. They're just absolutely hilarious together. I love them both so much. But okay, that's it. That's the ranking. Lunatune's official subjective, remember subjective ranking of the Legend of Zelda franchise. So what games did we differ on? Maybe what games were we on the same wavelength? I want to talk about it in the comments section down below. But with that, please like, subscribe, share it around, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.